avec du haricot tarbé,
还有
le
塔
haricot
布的
local
豆
ici.
子，
Alors ça, c'est ce qu'elle préfère, oui.
Jeter le bâton au chien à la tombée de la nuit. Et l'amour, un souper.
Vous nous avez honoré.
你看我们很荣幸嘛。
没有啊，没有啊。
Hello, everybody. On Wednesday, French President Emmanuel Macron, Little Napoleon, will land on China for a 2-day visit where he is hoping to advance a strategic dialogue which should help to advance key priorities for both France, European Union, and also Ukraine. Now, the real Napoleon said, Quand la Chine se réveillera, le monde tremblera, which actually means if China wakes up, the world will tremble. And we are now definitely in that moment, so one would expect Macron to take this advice not lightly at all. But of course, one could be very wrong. Let's break it down. Macron will have a few things to ask from China. One is more trade, please buy more things. 2, technology, we would like to have access to Chinese technology. And 3, Ukraine, please support Russia less regarding the war. And here, overall, Macron is expected to stay aligned with the European Union's official approach, which classes China simultaneously as a partner for cooperation, an economic partner, and a systemic rival. In terms of strategic clarity, this obviously is as clear as mud. Now, for Europe, it is a crucial economic moment, as the Europeans are grappling not only with a ballooning trade deficit that threatens its industrial fabric, it also has, of course, a huge financial deficit, and countries are facing bankruptcy. And generally speaking, the European-China relations are in poor shape. Beside the economic tensions, the European Union has also been a collateral victim of the US-China trade war, and that, of course, recently escalated with the China restricted exports of rare earths, which, of course, also critical in Europe. Then there was, of course, the whole Nexperia debacle, which triggered China to limit its export from chips from China to Europe, and that caused then again disruptions in the automotive supply chain. So if you want to understand why Macron goes to China and why Xi is not going to Europe, here is your first clue. He's there to find solutions and avoid more trouble. As mentioned, Macron will be speaking for the European Union, defending the idea that, and this comes from a source within the Élysée, the French presidential palace, quote, Europe should be respected as a major partner of China and not treated as a variable in the tensions or relations between China and the United States. For France, the aim is to have a genuine strategic dialogue with China, unquote. Now, here is where the trouble will start. As mentioned, Europe actually has no China strategy. Besides, decoupling is not leaving and labeling China as a partner for cooperation, but also a systemic rival. Now, in all fairness, China doesn't have a clear Europe strategy either. And this, of course, is rather strange for a country which has a strategy for almost everything. But this has to do with the fact that for China, Europe is actually very low on the list of priorities. At the level of grand strategy, Europe is definitely not a priority. Beijing, in a very funny way, has an American first foreign policy because the United States remains the unavoidable great power that China needs to confront, and this they know already since 2016. So, in this aspect, they look at Europe as just a proxy, as a tool militarily, economically, and financially of the United States. And therefore, why should you go to Brussels to discuss important world matters if actually the boss is in Washington? So you talk to Washington and you don't talk to Brussels. That is the logic behind this. Now, mentioning that, Europe is also not the second most important, the great power that Xi needs to manage and will talk to eventually. That, of course, is Russia. Xi and Putin have met each other 40 times already and confirmed again and again and again that there is a no limits friendship, which was first declared in 2022, just after the invasion of Ukraine. And this again was confirmed and seen again uh, when the Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin visited Beijing only a month ago, where she told him that it is our shared strategic choice to uphold, consolidate, and develop China Russia relations. This basically simply means the China Russian bromance is here to stay for a very long time. But Europe is also not the third most important partner for China globally. This year, Xi Jinping articulated a friendly neighborhood policy. Beijing faces massive complexity in managing its own neighborhood, from economically very sophisticated economies like South Korea and Japan, but also unstable regimes like Myanmar, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, and then, of course, there's the economic boom in Southeast Asia and the rise of India, and this all creates opportunities, but also challenges that China needs to manage. And then you might think Europe is there, but no, unfortunately not yet. There is then the global south. As the Americans are retreating from global engagement, as been seen very clearly now, China obviously will be growing its economic and diplomatic presence in developing countries at a global scale, and of course, that will give them long term benefits. And then finally, at the bottom of the pile, strategically speaking, Europe comes more or less pretty much after everybody else in the rest of the world. And as mentioned, the European security in China is being seen as a function of US power, and therefore we talk to Washington and not to Brussels. Yes, European trade and investment is important, but this too can be managed as part of a China US relationship because they do know that in the end it is Washington who decides about everything Europe does. So strategically, there is a huge mismatch between Macron if he wants a strategic dialogue between France and China. For China, Europe is not an important player at all, and for France, of course, China is a much more important player. Now, let's have a look then at the trade relationship. And there, Europe and China are doing much better. Now, in economic terms, the relationship between Europe, European Union, and China is very unequal. The European Union's trade deficit with China reached 305 billion euros in 2024. And at the moment, a lot of European industries and companies are suffering from weak demand in China. And of course, the Chinese export engine is squeezing Europe on several levels, going from electrical vehicles, which is quite well known, and where the German car companies are being hit, but also uh, related to the Shane low value goods, where Europe now also tries to limit them. So France wants China to buy actually more and sell less. And that is, of course, also why, and this is not very unusual, that a delegation of French CEOs will be joining Macron as they want access or more access or sell more into the. Related to this, there is also a very big topic regarding investment innovation. Chinese innovative and tech companies expanding now globally, and Europe is a top priority because they do know that the US is rather difficult. Now, a lot of European Union member states are considering imposing certain obligations on technology transfers when Chinese companies are investing in Europe. And France is here advocating, Macron is here advocating a sharing the gains of innovation, as he calls it. And the framing here is very interesting because this goes like this, and again, this is from a source within the Elysee. Quote, after 30 years of globalization that has largely enabled China to grow and innovate, it is important to take into account the fact that in a number of areas, the Chinese now have technologies that are particularly advanced and that can be shared with their trusted partners, including Europeans, unquote. And this is a very interesting way to frame what the French actually want. In other words, what they're saying is China grew because of globalization, and that is why they're so strong now, including their tech companies. Now, who enabled this globalization in the first place and allowed China into the WTO in 2001? Obviously, the Western world. So, in other words, it's thanks to us that your companies have grown so well. So now it's time to share some of the fruits of the work with us. This is because of us you're doing so well. That is the real meaning of what the French are saying. Let's then have a look at Russia. During the trip, it is expected that Macron will ask China to do everything they can to stop the war in Ukraine and support Russia less. Until now, despite repeated pleas by European Union leaders, including Macron several times, China has not moved 1 inch in its support for Russia. And as we just shown, the Russia-China bromance is deepening, not loosening. So there is no chance that China will move away from its position. There is no reason for them to move anyway. Moreover, from Beijing's perspective, the whole policy of maintaining ties with Moscow, Brussels, London, and Washington, despite the war, can be seen as a good success. So, for all these hurt feelings and complaints in Europe, Chinese position in this Russia-Ukraine war did not trigger any fundamental rupture in the Sino-European relations. Economic ties are still going strongly. Chinese capital is still flowing to Europe, they're investing, and European companies are still eager to make money in China. Here also, it's important to point out that it is expected that Macron will remind Xi that China, as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, has a responsibility to uphold global peace and international security, meaning stop the war in Ukraine. This, of course, is then where more trouble will come to Macron's way. And this has to do with Taiwan. Over the last years, the European Union is in fact moving towards a two-China strategy. Now, while they're not questioning the one China policy, but Brussels has downgraded political relations with Beijing, which has been clear over the last years, while at the same time they are promoting across the board Taiwan-European relations. And as mentioned, these European-China economic relations continue to grow, but also its tensions. But at the same time, European Union institutions and many governments are now treating Taiwan as a de facto independent state, which they are entitled to entertain economic, political, and security relations, and almost treat them on par with Beijing. And a vivid example of that was in September of this year when the foreign minister of China, Wang Yi, and also the foreign minister, as you can call it, maybe like that, from Taiwan, was in Europe, were both in Europe at the same time. They didn't visit the same countries, but they were both entertained by different European countries at the same time. And this, of course, shows the ambiguity of the Europeans. Now, China has already shown what it thinks of that behavior. In October 24, so 1 month and a half ago, the German Minister of Foreign Affairs Wadepool, who together with his boss Merz took a tougher stance on China and Taiwan and China's support for Russia, had to call off his visit to China, and that was just 2 days before his scheduled departure. And that was because he failed to secure meetings with senior officials beyond the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. And that, of course, was a clear sign from China. We have no intention now to talk to you if you keep talking so ridiculously about Taiwan. So this should be a lesson for Macron that if he wants to remind Xi that China, as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, has a responsibility to uphold global peace and international security, Xi might very well counter by saying that Europe should do exactly the same and uphold more firmly the one China policy, which is a result from the post-World War II order and a natural endpoint of what has been agreed then. Remember that after the Second World War, 1945, everybody agreed that Taiwan should go back to China. And this, of course, is exactly the same message as Xi brought to Trump only last week when there was this big fuss, and still big fuss going on, about the Taiwan issue, where the Japanese Prime Minister had this remark that Japan could come to the help of Taiwan if it was attacked by China. So, to wrap it up, Macron is going to China and will ask Xi the following three things. One, could you buy some more European products because our economy is not going well and you sell actually too much to us? Two, could we also share in your technology, which you developed so greatly thanks to our globalization efforts? And three, Could you support Russia a little bit less, because that war is actually hurting us a lot? And by the way, our allies, the Americans, are bailing out, so quite in a weak position right now. So Macron will have 3 rather big demands from China, and he will have 0 things to give to China. I think we all knows how this will end. All right, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please click the like button. Please subscribe to the channel for more, and we see each other very soon. Bye bye.